everybody, and welcome to Charts with Dan. I am recapping really the first normal-ish, but not really box office weekend in many, many months because Unhinged became the first new nationwide release this past weekend. We're going to break down that box office, and we're going to look at the weekend ahead where things really kind of maybe start kicking into a higher gear. We have Bill and Ted Face the Music, which is coming out, which is going to be a hybrid VOD theatrical release. But the big news is the probable, could it actually be happening release of the new Mutants after literally years of delays. We're going to talk about what that movie looks like. Could it really kickstart the box office? And a little investigation into what things are looking like so far for the movie. But before we do that, let's look at the box office weekend that we just put behind us. I was at home watching DC Fandom and doing coverage. You can find that coverage right here on the channel. There's some cards and everything else that you can click. But there were some people that were at the movies for the first time in many, many weeks. And Unhinged tops the box office charts. It took in just over $4 million this past weekend. Now, that includes the markets that were already open last weekend in Canada, and also the theaters that reopened. Many of the big chains, most of the big chains here in the United States, reopened some of their theaters this weekend. Over $4 million there at number one for Unhinged. The SpongeBob movie, Sponge on the Run, playing in Canada. That's going to make a PVOD and then CBS All Access, or whatever they're going to call it by then, debut next year here in the United States. But the Canadian run's got it up there at number two. Words on Bathroom Walls, which also staked a claim for coming out this past weekend, is at number three. Then you have a re-release of The Goonies there at number four. There's been library titles in the top five all summer. And then Cutthroat City, a film by RZA, there at number five. So a very crazy looking top five there, of course anchored by Unhinged. And I think when you look at the record books, it would probably say, and I went back and did some research, that it is the lowest grossing number one film for a movie in wide release in quite some time. Now, again, you have to put a huge asterisk by that because, yes, of course the movie was in wide release as far as number of theaters, but the capacity of those theaters was restricted so heavily that it's not a one-to-one comparison. You can go back to the 90s when Jerry Maguire was number one. It made a little over $5 million and try to draw some comparisons there. But there's inflation to take into account, and really the fact that just not every theater was open, and even the ones that were open were heavily restricted when it comes to capacity. So I don't really think that there's a lot for the record books there. It is the highest grossing number one film since March 13th through the 15th of this year. That was the last weekend that theaters were open. The second week of Onward's release, it topped the box office after a huge plunge from its opening weekend because things were already starting to slow down here in the United States. It topped the box office at $10.6 million, and that was the last major weekend at the box office until now. So I think that what we're going to see is a little glimmer, perhaps similar to we've seen how it worked with China as they reopened their box office. The first weekend had some releases, but not a whole lot. People were slowly trickling back into the theaters, and then you saw a progressive step up week by week. China's theaters have been open for about a month now, and this weekend was the first one that you could really say was anything approaching business as usual because they had one of their local films, The 800, which was originally supposed to come out back in 2019, did not pass muster with Chinese censors. There were accusations of government meddling and censorship, you name it. Sadly, not a rare thing for films that come out in China, but it received a release this past weekend, and in its first week drew in over $115 million. It is by far the highest opening for China this year. Their theaters were closed long before the United States theaters were closed. So this was the first weekend at the Chinese box office, which has a few weeks on reopening over the United States, when you could say that things were approaching normal. Now, this movie would have had a much bigger opening. It is almost assured were things to have gone as they should have gone. But this does show that there is a resurgent film market and people returning to the theaters in much greater numbers here in the 4th or 5th week of Chinese theaters being open. As a matter of fact, now these are unofficial numbers because the box office reporting has not, as of taping this episode, resumed as far as studios reporting them, as far as other services collecting worldwide numbers and making official reports for them. The last numbers that I can find are still all the way back in March. However, by my unofficial tally, and some of these numbers will have changed because Bad Boys for Life has come out in China, and so has Dolittle and Sonic. So these will have adjusted a little bit. Even Invisible Man has made some more money over the outbreak period, but roughly right now, just in its first week of release, the 800 breaks into the top 10 2020 worldwide box office grossers, even by the metrics of the numbers that we had in place when things shut down back in March. So it's possible it might be a little bit lower, but it is going to make a lot more money. So you're going to see that jump into the top 5. And I am really hoping that these numbers become official soon, because if movies are officially coming out, then I think we should probably start getting some actual hard data being reported by studios. They're probably going to ramp that back up as well. So it wouldn't be shocking to not see that data for this weekend as far as the official ones, the worldwide numbers, etc., coming in at the same rate that they used to. However, that may be the next thing that comes in line after opening some theaters and releasing some movies, and then the New Mutants obviously being the big one coming up this weekend. It is by far the most high-profile release to come out since March. No offense to Russell Crowe. As I said in my review, I don't want to mess with Russell Crowe, and neither should you. However, the New Mutants, after years of anticipation, is hitting theaters this Friday, allegedly, which means that this could be the very last time we do the countdown to New Mutants. We're at 4 days, folks. We are at threat level midnight. It looks like this thing is actually going to happen, or the New Mutants is about to have its cruelest joke played on it yet, because we are in single digits. It is in line. The tickets are on sale. They're not just on sale. The tickets have been sold, and we're going to look at that in a second. The ads are out. The die apparently has been cast. New Mutants is going to come out this Friday unless something crazy happens. But with this movie, I'm not counting that out because we have been at this for so long. I went back and I looked at the first time I did the countdown to New Mutants, because it came after the Mountdown when I was over at Fandom Entertainment. If you remember, we were counting down to the release of Cats. We started the countdown to New Mutants on January 6th, Lon Harris by my side, January 6th, 2020. Was the first countdown to New Mutants. There were 89 days left until the release of the movie. That was 232 days ago. So even at that point, the fact that the movie hadn't come out was a running gag, and we still had so much ahead of us. Of course, we had no idea that any of this was going to happen to the scale that it has here in the United States. So there was so much left in front of us, but I think that is hilarious. The countdown started back in January with 89 days. That was 232 days ago. We are now at 4 days, and it looks like this is actually going to happen. So New Mutants may be hitting theater. I still can't say it's going to. I just can't do it. I cannot make the words, the New Mutants is actually coming out, resonate in my brain. But let's assume that it actually does happen and that the New Mutants does open in theaters. What does that mean for the box office? Is it going to swoop in and just annihilate these numbers that we saw with Unhinged and Russell Crowe with the first movie back? Well, I think that let's take a look at what the possibilities may be. Now, this is something that we looked at last week with the theater status. Now, some people said, oh, you should do the top 10 theatrical markets in the United States. And yes, I agree. That's a possibility. This is just top 10 by population. The theatrical markets data was a little bit tougher to come by. I was actually trying to find it. But this is the theater status in the 10 biggest U.S. cities. And again, New York and Los Angeles, the two largest markets. Unless somebody pulls some strings between now and Friday, theaters will remain closed this weekend for the release of the New Mutants. Arizona theaters also closed. And then you see two of the other top 10 markets in California. There are no theaters as far as brick and mortar theaters open in the state of California. However, New Mutants, along with Bill and Ted Face the Music, will be playing at drive-in theaters this weekend. So you are going to see some revenue for the New Mutants coming from drive-in theater locations in California. Apparently, drive-ins drove a portion of the gross for Unhinged this weekend with Russell Crowe. So I would not discount that drive-in revenue. However, there is also, you would think, going to be a large amount of revenue coming from the traditional theater, indoor theaters where they are allowed to open. So to set expectations and to think about what this weekend is going to be, I decided to do a little bit of investigation and look at some theaters in those markets in which theaters are allowed to be open. Indoor theaters are allowed to be open. And I found theaters in 2 cities that I wanted to look at just to see if you're planning to go, number 1, to an indoor theater, what that might look like, and number 2, what these capacity limits might actually produce in these theaters. So the first one is from a top 10 market, and this is from Dallas, Texas. Now, I picked showtimes on Thursday night, early Thursday night, because I figured the most motivated people that want to go see the New Mutants are going to be there at the early screenings. So this is from the AMC North Park 15 in Dallas, Texas, for a showing early on Thursday night when preview screenings start. And as you can see, this is a very large theater. This theater has a capacity of 368 people. When you look at that map, of that 368 available seats, 43 of those seats have been booked. Now, those seats are not all going to be filled up. As a matter of fact, if you look, very few of those seats are probably actually going to be filled. Looking down at the front of the theater, you have 1 booked seat and 5 booked off around it because, again, of social distancing guidelines that are in place at this AMC theater. So, yes, 172 seats are going to be empty. However, just the logistics and the mathematics of how they're blocking off seats means that there aren't going to be that many more that are filled. You can see AMC has set reportedly its capacity limits at 30%. There's no overriding local mandate in Dallas that would set that limit lower that I found. But even given that, 11.6% of seats have been sold. The amount of seats that you're going to sell, even mathematically, I don't see how you get to that 30% capacity limit because of the social distancing guidelines and what you have to do and block off. So these capacity limits that AMC has set of 30%, I think really, depending on where people are sitting and how big your groups are, I don't know how you get much more than 20% capacity given those guidelines. I think that that's great. I honestly think that they should be more cautious in what they're putting out as far as guidelines instead of less cautious. But I also think if you're calculating what New Mutants is going to do and you're thinking like, well, if it's very popular, you're going to hit that 30% capacity. Given the spatial real estate and given the spatial realities of that, I think it's very hard for any of these theaters to even hit that 30% capacity limit. There's another market I wanted to look at. This one is in Chicago, Illinois, another one of the 10 biggest U.S. cities. This is at the AMC River East 21 in Chicago, Illinois. And this theater, even a more dramatic look at how the social distancing guidelines are going to affect capacity. This is a theater with a capacity of 184, meaning there are 184 seats in this theater. 28 seats have been booked, but due to the layout of the theater, that means that with the 28 seats that were booked, 96 seats have been blocked off for social distancing. That leaves 60 seats empty. Now, Illinois has set a capacity limit of 50 people or 50 seats filled or a 50% capacity. As you can see, there's no way that this theater would get to 50% capacity. 15% currently of the seats that are filled are sold tickets. However, the theater itself is 67% full when you take into account the seats that have been blocked off. So it's already 2/3 full. And again, if you book any one of those other seats, you're going to be blocking off a large swath of seats around you. So when you look at the Illinois capacity limit, you're definitely not going to hit 50%. You're not going to hit the 30% capacity that AMC has set, and I don't even think you're going to hit that 50-seat capacity as far as fitting that in. So what I think we're seeing here is that even given the stringent capacity guidelines that these theaters have set and a lot of the localities and municipalities have set, the geography of how they're blocking these seats off means that indoor theater capacity this weekend is going to be even lower than projections. Now, it's very possible that that is the intention, that they set these capacities because they knew that they would not hit them, and they want to set a high capacity to make sure that all of social distancing guidelines are being followed. And I applaud that. I honestly think that that is to be lauded and rewarded. However, I do think that means that we should all moderate our expectations when we think about how New Mutants is going to do this weekend. I don't think it is going to be this huge savior that comes in and, does 10 times unhinged business. Maybe I'm wrong. It's very possible that I'm wrong, that drive-in rentals are gonna really run up the score here because you can bring some more people in. But I do think that we're gonna see something much closer to what we saw in China, which is that you have in your first weekend a very small and a very cautious number of people. The next weekend you have a larger number of people, to be sure, but not a huge step up. Maybe I'm wrong. I could very well be wrong, but looking at these capacity numbers and the fact that New Mutants is not a driver like an MCU film would be. If this was Black Widow, I think we'd probably be looking at a much bigger number. I don't know how many people are going to say, I'm going to go to the trouble or the risk of seeing this film if they're on the fence about it. So I definitely think that New Mutants is going to open above Unhinged. I think that's unquestionable. The real question lies, though, is how well is it going to do? And I don't think it's going to be a monumental number. I think this is a movie that is going to play slowly out over several weeks as theaters reopen. We also don't know how good the movie is. Now, if the movie's great and word gets out and buzz gets out, you can see the movie build week to week in the way that movies used to do. There's still a lot of unknowns, but I am not personally staking my claim or expecting a massive jump up. I mean, you could double it. Obviously, double, yes, but double 4 million to 8 million is not like doubling from 30 million to 60 million. We're definitely going to see a jump up. But I don't think it's going to be this mind-blowing number. And if it is, then that's great for theatrical exhibition, as long as people are being safe, as long as this isn't coming at the cost of safety or guidelines not being followed. As if the movie business can operate in a healthy way, healthy financially and healthy to its patrons and to the safety of others, then that's great. But we cannot prioritize the safety of the business over the safety of people. Now, one other interesting note that came up, I mentioned that, the thing that'll really drive a number is when a huge draw opens, like we saw in China with the 800 this past weekend. Well, obviously there is a movie on the horizon that is much, much more anticipated, even more than the New Mutants, which has been much anticipated for many years now, and that is Christopher Nolan's Tenet. However, there was an interesting article that ran in Variety today, which said that Tenet, this seems kind of backward, can play in drive-ins where indoor theaters are open, but they are not allowing Tenet to play in drive-ins where indoor theaters are closed. I know this seems a little backwards, right? You would think that they might say Tenet can only play in drive-ins where there are no indoor theaters open, and that if you have indoor theaters, then they're not playing it at drive-ins. But no, it's kind of like the rich stay rich and the poor stay poor. So right now, and again, Warner Brothers could reverse this, but right now, if you're in New York, if you're in California, if you're in a place where theaters are closed and you were hoping that maybe you could go see Tenet at a drive-in, right now, that's not going to happen because Warner Brothers has explicitly said that they are not allowing that. They want to protect the twists and turns of the movie, and that they won't be playing them outdoors if you can't go see it indoors. Warner Brothers has been really fussy about this movie. Let's be honest. I mean, they've been very particular about it, about the date, about wanting to put it in theaters. I would say not even verging on pushy about it. This is yet another move that, to me, is like, I understand. You have a Christopher Nolan movie. He is a top-flight director. He's a brilliant director. Everyone's always guessing what his movies are going to be and what's going to happen. And of course, you want to preserve that for people. But we are also living in extraordinary times. We're living in times that are more extraordinary than Christopher Nolan is an extraordinary filmmaker. And I think we're approaching the point with Warner Brothers, honestly, as a fan. And listen, I'm looking forward to seeing Tenet as well. But if you're going to be that picky as a studio to say that to protect the sanctity of what's happening in the movie, that we're not going to allow people in states where theaters are closed to even have the opportunity to see it at a drive-in theater that's open, then you just got to delay it. If you're going to be that picky, if you're not going to make any concession whatsoever, then you got to push it to 2021. Why would you take away this one avenue that people have to see the movie in states where there are no theaters open? This is not a baseball game. Tenet is not the Dodgers. You don't have to run on blackout rules, or if you don't sell out the home game, then the people can't watch it on TV at home. I get it. I get that Warner Brothers wants to protect their investment, and that Christopher Nolan is a big theater guy and he wants people to see that movie, and I sympathize. But if you're gonna be this picky about how and when people see your movie, then push it to 2021, because we are in the beyond the further at this point. You have to make some concessions. So we'll see if this stands. Perhaps Warner Brothers will reverse their decision. I don't know. The other thing is, like, who does that come from? Does that come from the distribution arm? Does that come from the executives? Does that come from Chris Nolan? We don't know that. I think we might see that reverse. But yeah, right now, I think if you're Warner Brothers and if you're Tenet, I get it. You want people to see the movie, but you can't be this particular, or else you got to make the acknowledgement that you're going to push it till later when you can control it a little bit more. So that little Dan rant over. I think that I'm going to be very curious to see what New Mutants does this weekend, what the box office returns are, to really see the dispatches from the theaters. I'm hoping that this is an orderly and non-eventful reopening. I hope against hope. You're talking to the same guy that walks into every Transformers movie thinking this will be the one. Maybe this reopening of movie theaters this weekend for the New Mutants will be our Bumblebee and not our Transformers Age of Extinction as a society. Let's see what happens. Let's also see what did happen. We've been doing this all summer. It's been a lot of fun. Let's take a flashback at a different weekend in box office history and see what was number one at the box office. And man, when you look at the summer of 1985, Michael J. Fox was just crushing it that summer. He had the number one movie, August 23rd through 25th, 1985, the number one movie in the land, Back to the Future, in its 8th week of release. And he had the number two movie debuting in August with Teen Wolf. Man, they hit the lottery, right? Can you imagine being the producers of Teen Wolf and knowing that Back to the Future, you just crushed it box office wise? It's like the people in The Man in the Iron Mask when Titanic came out. They're like, oh, we got the next Leo movie? That's awesome. So Teen Wolf debuted at number 2, right behind Back to the Future in its 8th week of release. Then you had another one of my favorite 80s movies, really one of my favorite movies in general, Pee-wee's Big Adventure in week 3 at just over $4 million. Then kind of a obscure Tom Hanks, John Candy movie, at least to me, Volunteers, in its 2nd week at $3.5 million. And then a Michael Cimino film with Mickey Rourke, Year of the Dragon, in its 2nd week of release at $2.8 million. But yeah, 1985 was the summer of Michael J. Fox for sure. Let's look at some other notable moments from this weekend in box office history. Back in 1939, week 34, one of the most important, most beloved films of all time, The Wizard of Oz, began its opening around the country in 1939. In 1981, one of the classic horror comedies of all time, a big influence on one of my favorite directors, Edgar Wright, An American Werewolf in London, hit theaters. In 1998, Wesley Snipes and Blade debuted at number 1, one of the early entries into the Marvel, not the official Marvel Cinematic Universe, but certainly the first version of a Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then back in 2009, 11 years ago, happy anniversary, Sam Levine, Inglourious Bastards, my personal favorite Quentin Tarantino film, and not just because Sam Levine is in it, opened at number 1 with over $38 million. I just love that movie. It was on its way to a Best Picture nomination, also a Best Supporting Actor win for Christoph Waltz, who is fantastic in that movie. I'm just a big fan of that movie. I don't know. Let's look at what people are watching at home, and let's start with the charts on Amazon. Red 2, which has been hanging around the chart for a few weeks now, is up to number 1 on the Amazon chart, followed by Trolls World Tour. Then coming back to the chart, Sonic the Hedgehog, The King of Staten Island there at number 4. And then this has been a big, maybe people are getting ready for Bill and Ted Face the Music, because we've got John Wick Chapter 3 at number 5, then The Silencing at number 6, then entering the chart at number 7, John Wick. Secret Garden and Game Night at numbers 8 and 9. And then at number 10, John Wick Chapter 2. So people doing some cramming on John Wick. Hey, listen, I'll never get angry at people wanting to have a John Wick marathon. That is a lot of gun fu and punching and Baba Yaga talk and talking about pencils, but I'm there for it. John Wick trilogy, one of my favorite action trilogies of ever, really, but particularly the last several years. Let's look at what people have been looking at over on iTunes. We have The Silencing there at number 1. That's a holdover from last week. Then Tesla, starring Ethan Hawke as Nikola Tesla at number 2. Then The Vanished, another new entry at number 3, followed by the unrated version of Fantasy Island returning to the chart. Then we have The Tax Collector and Made in Italy. Those are 2 holdovers. The Dark Knight trilogy, which has been offered as a bundle, I think because of the DC Fandom event. There was a lot of DC buildup and stuff featured on iTunes. That's there at number 7. Zack Snyder's Watchmen at number 8. He just debuted the newest trailer for Zack Snyder's Justice League this past weekend. And then at number 9 and number 10, 2 of my favorite movies from last year, 1917 and Ford versus Ferrari, rounding out the top 10. And then finally, what are people watching on Netflix at home when they're not buying stuff from iTunes or Amazon? Project Power remains the number 1 draw on Netflix, at least as of today. Then at number 2, Drunk Parents, which is a 2019 film starring Alec Baldwin and Salma Hayek. I think kids might be just clicking what they see around the house because the parents have been with their kids all summer. I think that there's a lot of drunk parents around the country right now and honestly around the world. Then we have The Sleepover there at number 3, Mr. Peabody and Sherman at number 4. That's a holdover from last week. One Bedroom at number 5. I was always looking for those listings. They're tough to find in Los Angeles, at least at an affordable price. I think that's a horror movie, but so is Searching for an Apartment in a Major City. Then The Lost Husband and Despicable Me at number 7. Seventh Son at number 8, confusingly. Jurassic Park stays on the top 10 at number 9, and rightfully so. And then there's an animated film called Fearless at number 10, although when you look on it, it's like it's kind of like David Fincher did with Seven, where it's like S-E and then a 7 and then an E-N. Fearless, if you were going to say it phonetically, is like fe at Erless _ but I just decided to write Fearless because why not? That's just unwieldy to say, if I'm being honest. So that's the rundown for the last weekend. We will be back here next Monday with a look at the box office charts. We'll see if New Mutants was a step up from where we were this last weekend, or if it blew the doors off the box office. We won't know until this time next week. However, there's a lot of space to cover between now and then, and you can stay tuned because I will say, without revealing too much right now, but there are a lot of reviews coming up on the channel this week. I will have a review of the New Mutants up later this week. I will also be watching Bill and Ted Face the Music when it comes out on VOD. You can catch that review here this week. There's a movie that's being sent to critics this week, but I don't yet know when the embargo goes down on that. So you may see that one, another big movie coming out this week. And then obviously next Monday, screenings start for Tenet. Barring some unforeseen development, I believe that I will be able to bring you a review of Tenet on next Monday. How and when and where and why, it's all above board, I assure you, but I'll fill you in on that later this week. But I am planning to bring you reviews of these new movies as they come out, come hell or high water. I will say it has not been easy to try to figure this out because it's not like it just the machine just started up again. There's been lots of coughs and sputters and stops and starts, so getting the review wheels going back again has been an interesting process. However, thank you for watching the show today, and if you want to check out even more of what I'm up to, you can check me out over on Patreon, patreon.com/Dan Murrell. In addition to all the great stuff that we already do over there, I'm getting ready to roll out a bunch of new features that people have been asking for and additions to tiers that already exist. So now would be a good time to head on over there and check it out because starting rolling over at the beginning of next month, we're going to be doing a lot of fun stuff. And I want to thank these patrons especially. These are just some of my producer level patrons who have helped me keep things going up and running. We've been increasing a lot of more interactive shows, people calling in. We did a show called Dan Decides, which is kind of like a bunch of mini speed rounds about movie stuff. A lot of fun stuff. I'd love to have you join me there. You can also join me on Instagram at MurrellDan. You can join me on Twitter at MurrellDan. And of course, you're already joining me here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the bell so you know when these reviews and box office stories are going live, and I'm always on the lookout for something fun happening. And until next time, thank you so much for watching.